Greetings, my dear viewer. You're on the channel The Price of Cheating. The channel is for those who appreciate traditional family values and condemn adultery. So be sure to subscribe to the channel. Let's get started. I thought I understood what lay ahead, but I was mistaken. The evidence surrounded me. Her indifference, the absence of affection, and her purposeful withdrawal from intimacy were all too telling. It was clear she was either disillusioned with our marriage, already betraying it, or on the verge of doing so. I resolved to release her, and as the months passed, she seemed increasingly at ease with the idea. What perplexed me was why she lingered. Why prolong the inevitable? Why not sever ties and move on? Financially, there was little to complicate matters. The house had no mortgage, thanks to my grandmother, who left it to us after her passing. We moved in shortly thereafter, but even then, aspects of her behavior began to irk me. I sought advice from my parents, who suggested keeping the house in their name temporarily for protection. Before this, we had a home of our own, though the bank held the deed. We'd spent 6 years there until an incident caused by Sandy's negligence changed everything. One evening, after drinking excessively, she fell asleep while candles burned near the curtains. The fire alarm jolted her awake just in time to escape, but flames had already engulfed the living room. By the time I arrived, firefighters were battling the inferno. I informed them about the firearms and ammunition stored inside. As the heat caused rounds to discharge, they withdrew, leaving the house to burn. A friend of mine, the fire captain, noted in his report that the fire was uncontrollable upon their arrival. This detail smoothed the insurance claim process. Fortunately, our policy did not penalize negligence, which resulted in a payment of $30,000, more than I expected. After collecting some of the money, we moved into my grandmother's house, keeping about $20,000 for ourselves. If we split, she'd receive half, enough to secure a decent apartment. I could have stayed where I was. Anticipating that separation wouldn't sit well with her, I took precautions. I'd foreseen this eventuality but hadn't expected it to unfold so coldly. Our lives barely intersected anymore. My work hours often kept me out late, particularly during winter. One evening, I noticed her car absent from the garage and the porch light off. Inside, I called her name but received no reply. I found her in front of her vanity, applying makeup, dressed in a short, plunging outfit I'd never seen before. I stood silently at the doorway as she ignored me. "Going somewhere?" I finally asked. "Yes," she answered without turning. "I have a date." She appeared to expect an outburst, but I remained calm, watching until her unease was evident. "Did you hear me?" she repeated. "I said I have a date." "I heard you," I replied evenly. "No." "What?" she asked, confused. "No," I reiterated. "You can date after you've moved out, not while we're still under the same roof. Pack some things and find another place to stay for a few days. I'll figure out the rest and we can discuss splitting things later." She laughed sharply. "I'm not leaving. I like this house, and when it's mine, I'll redecorate however I please. If you're weak, I'll come out ahead when we sell. Do yourself a favor and move in with your parents while we sort this out." "No," I said firmly. "You're the one who's leaving." "Oh, I'll go," she snapped. "In about half an hour. And don't think of coming back while I'm gone, or I'll call the police. I'll make something up to get you arrested. They'll hold you for 48 hours on a domestic violence charge, plenty of time for me to change the locks and get a restraining order." I smiled, and she paused. "Don't even think about it," she warned. "I'm serious, Michael. This is final. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have lipstick to finish." "Make sure it matches the ring on the tube," I said, still smiling as I left. She wouldn't risk asking her date to pick her up, so I assumed she planned to meet him elsewhere. In the garage, I grabbed my aluminum baseball bat and shattered her car's headlights and taillights with 4 precise swings. That vehicle wasn't going anywhere. Back inside, her purse on the counter caught my eye. I rifled through its contents, finding 6 packs of rubber bands and her phone. I took the phone to the garage, placed it on my workbench, and smashed it into 3 pieces with a hammer. I left the rubber bands untouched, ensuring she couldn't accuse me of stealing them. When she entered the kitchen in towering heels, she froze, seeing me calmly sipping coffee. Get out! She barked, pointing at the door. Why would the police come? I asked evenly. I haven't threatened you or touched you. All I've done is refuse to leave my own home. Seething, she stormed off, her heels clacking sharply. Minutes later, she returned, yelling, "What did you do to my car?" Why assume I did anything? I replied, keeping my tone neutral. You shouldn't leave it out on the street like that. She glared, muttered something, and left again. Soon after, she reappeared in sneakers, clutching her high heels. Have a great evening, I called as she walked out. From the window, I watched her knock on neighbors' doors, one after another, only to be turned away each time. It was almost entertaining. By the time she reached the end of the block, it dawned on her that no one would help. My earlier call to Mom had ensured the neighbors were aware of the situation. I spent my childhood on this street, surrounded by neighbors who knew my name and seemed to regard me with warmth. The same couldn't be said about her. I had a hunch she'd soon try to reach for the phone, so I leaned back and let things play out. About 20 minutes later, the police arrived. At the time, I didn't realize she had already returned, lurking in the shadows until the officers showed up. One of the officers was a familiar face from my high school days. We had graduated together. I welcomed them inside, offering coffee to ease the tension. Their unease was palpable. Let me guess, I said, trying to break the ice. You're here about a domestic disturbance complaint. Tell me, do you see any broken furniture, scratches on my hands, torn clothing? They shook their heads. Then why would you think something happened? She claims you threatened her, one officer explained. Michael, she's saying you told her you'd ruin her life after she mentioned leaving you. That's quite a statement, I responded. How serious is it to file a false report? The male officer replied, if you have evidence to disprove her claims, now's the time to show it. So, I played a video from my phone. Their expressions darkened as they watched. Well, Michael, the male officer said, this video changes things. Perjury isn't your call, that's ours. But you could definitely use this to secure a restraining order. It's clear she made a threat when she said, you'll get yours. You two clearly shouldn't be anywhere near each other, the female officer added. You can file for a restraining order first thing tomorrow. Use our names for support. In the meantime, make sure your house is secure to prevent her from sneaking back in. If she does, call us immediately. Oh, and Michael, I remember how you can get when you're annoyed. Keep that temper in check. Let the court handle this. Yes, ma'am, I replied with a slight grin. Sweet cheeks. Her brow shot up. Excuse me? Sorry, I said, feigning innocence. No one's called you that since high school, right? Especially now that you're wearing a badge. Old habits die hard. She flushed and made a hasty exit. Her partner chuckled. Sweet cheeks, huh? She's been through a rough divorce recently. You're not the only one dealing with a difficult spouse. Don't give us a reason to come back tonight. They didn't need to return. While I was preoccupied with the officers, my cunning wife had slipped into the garage. Her plan was to take my car, but she quickly realized she'd left her own keys on the kitchen table and couldn't open the garage door. Undeterred, she turned her attention to my old SUV, the Monster, as she mockingly called it. The Monster was a vintage 1989 full-size SUV with a powerful 454 engine and four-wheel drive. It was in pristine condition, mainly used for towing and clearing snow. What she didn't know was that I had disconnected the garage opener chain as a precaution. She climbed into the beast, started it up, and hit the opener button. Believing the door had lifted, she released the clutch and reversed at full throttle. The door remained firmly shut. The SUV's immense power smashed through it and collided with a parked patrol car outside, shoving it a few feet and causing significant damage. The female officer, Heather, had been reaching for the patrol car's door when the SUV burst out of the garage. 5 seconds later, and it could have been disastrous. Her partner, however, wasn't so lucky. As he attempted to get into the car, the collision sent him flying 10 feet down the driveway. Heather, a fiery redhead with a matching temper, exploded with rage. While I ran to check on her partner, she stormed to the SUV, yanked my wife out by her hair, and began shouting furiously. My wife, Addison, groaned but didn't resist much. Heather quickly cuffed her and radioed for backup. "Officer down!" she barked. "Immediate assistance needed at 411 Elm Drive." Officer Jones lay unconscious, his face bloodied and his nose clearly broken. I carefully held his head to prevent further injury and kept him from choking on the blood. 20 minutes later, an ambulance arrived, accompanied by what seemed like every officer in town. Heather went to the hospital with Jones, leaving after giving a detailed statement to detectives and pointing them in my direction. Addison, meanwhile, was taken away in another ambulance for minor injuries caused by the airbag. I recounted the events to the police 4 times before they were satisfied. In a small town like ours, I knew several officers, including the chief, who had once been my baseball coach. "Any word on Jones?" I asked. "Not much yet," he replied, "but it doesn't seem too serious. They're running tests to make sure." I thanked him and turned to leave, but he called me back. "By the way," he added, "your wife's fine, at least physically. But how do you even charge someone with sheer stupidity?" Shortly after, Addison got out of jail on bail and emptied our shared bank account, leaving me with just $1,000. She needed the money to repay her parents, who had covered her bail, and to hire a lawyer. Thankfully, the restraining order ensured all communication went through attorneys. At our first legal meeting, things didn't go well for her. Her lawyer laid out her demands: the house or half its value, plus new furniture, appliances, and other items. I had anticipated this. My lawyer presented documents proving the house belonged to my father. Upon hearing this, Addison erupted in frustration. Next, she demanded reimbursement for shared purchases. Once again, my lawyer had evidence, checks from my personal account, showing I had paid for everything. Her frustration boiled over, but there was little she could do. In the end, her attempts to come out on top collapsed under the weight of her own missteps, leaving her with almost nothing. Following my father's advice, we made a plan to pick up an item. I brought it to her place, met up with Dad in his truck, and he handled the payment with a check while I passed him the cash. Since all the rented furniture belonged to the homeowner, we weren't allowed to keep any of it. Still, the owner permitted us to claim one of the bedrooms, perhaps as a sentimental gesture. Most of our possessions stayed beyond her reach. The next weekend, I repaired her car and dropped it off at her parents' house, only to find out they were busy securing bail for her. During the divorce proceedings, the judge called my attorney and me into his office to review the documents. He couldn't hide his amusement and eventually remarked, "You handled this cleverly. You saw it coming, didn't you?" I gave a nonchalant shrug. "Not exactly this, but I knew it wouldn't go smoothly. I was just protecting myself." Technically, she owed me $9 of the money she took. However, I told the judge that I would give it up if she signed the papers. With a sigh, he replied, "Fair enough." Back in the courtroom, he informed Addison that everything was legally sound, leaving her no room for objections. I even conceded that she could keep the money she'd taken if she agreed to the divorce terms. Otherwise, I'd demand repayment. Seething, she had no choice but to comply. When the gavel struck, my freedom was official. She then had to focus on more pressing issues, facing charges for filing a false police report and assaulting an officer with a vehicle. She caught a break and ended up with a year of probation. About a month later, I ran into her at Walmart. She asked if we could talk, so we grabbed coffee and sat down. It took her a moment to speak. "Why were you so cruel to me?" she asked. "I could ask you the same thing," I replied. "When did you decide to end things? You could have just told me instead of dragging it out and making those last months miserable. And why flaunt your date in my face? You know I don't give up easily." She sat quietly before admitting, "I wasn't happy. I hadn't been for a long time. I hated losing our house in the fire, hated moving here, hated leaving our friends. That's probably when it started. Looking back, I realize you're a good man, and I should have just talked to you." "That's one of the dumbest things I've heard you say," I shot back. "I didn't want to leave either. I liked where we lived. If you'd given me any sign you wanted to stay, we could have used the insurance money to get another place. Even after we moved, we could have gone back." She nodded slowly. "Maybe that's part of it. But the truth is, I wanted to leave. And at the end, I just wanted to hurt you. I blamed you for everything and didn't care who got caught in the fallout." She sighed. I regret how I acted. We should have talked and ended things peacefully. I stood up. Well, that was enlightening. Addison, you've got things to work through. I hear you're heading back home, so I probably won't see you again. Try to live a better life, and if you find love again, learn from our mistakes. Without another word, I walked away. 4 years later, I saw her at a friend's funeral. She looked almost the same, maybe a bit heavier with longer hair. She gave me a smile, but we didn't speak. 2 years after that, I ran into Sergeant Sweetcheeks at the shooting range. We chatted, and I learned she was engaged to Officer Jones, who had fully recovered. He'd received a sizable insurance payout from my auto policy and was using it for a down payment on a house. 18 months later, I saw her again and asked how married life was treating her. Not great, she admitted. He didn't think as highly of me as you do. I caught him with another woman. I'm sorry to hear that, I replied. But maybe this is your chance to start fresh. She looked at me thoughtfully. You're right, and I hear you're a detective now. Maybe you can use that brilliant mind to figure out what I'm thinking. She blushed and laughed. You're lucky. If you're serious about treating me the way I deserve, maybe I'll consider sharing more of myself with the right man. Pick me up at 7, wear a suit, and don't mess it up. At exactly 7 p.m., I arrived in my best suit. Whether it was good instincts or pure luck, I knew better than to make a scene. We took our time, and I didn't sleep with her until we were married 9 months later. It was worth the wait. These days, she's still Sweetcheeks to me, though the nickname stays private. As for Addison, she's seeing a psychologist. From what I hear, she's been married twice since then. Her second husband keeps her grounded and sometimes reminds her of me when she acts up, which apparently helps her stay focused. That's according to a cousin who keeps me in the loop. Good for her. Today, our daughter Kelly got married. As a wedding gift, we gave her my grandmother's old house. Heather never cared for it. After her parents passed, we moved into their spacious farmhouse. It's where we'll stay until we pass it down to our son, Mark. Hopefully not for a long time. After Kelly left for her honeymoon, I surprised Sweetcheeks with tickets for a European cruise to celebrate our 25th anniversary. She's always dreamed of traveling, and I finally managed to save enough for a 2-week tour of Europe. Now, Sweetcheeks is calling me back to bed, holding a glass of water and a small blue pill. This holiday promises to be unforgettable. This concludes the story. If you like it, then put your powerful like and subscribe to the channel.